In the world of fame and fortune, not every story ends in glory. Some are marked by struggle and heartbreaking loss. Today we take a closer look at 35 black celebrities whose lives were tragically shortened by a devastating illness. Though they shined brightly on stage and screen, many faced private battles hidden from the public eye. Their journeys are filled with courage, pain, and unforgettable impact. If you're ready to uncover the truth behind their early departures, type 1 in the comments and prepare for a powerful, eye-opening story. In the 1980s, Germaine Stewart was a natural force, a dazzling whirlwind on the R&B stage. With his breakout hit, "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," he redefined sensuality with elegance, captivating the world not through his body, but through charm, sophistication, and a voice as smooth as silk. He was a symbol of confidence, a torchbearer of style, and a rare kind of magic on stage. But as the lights dimmed, a less glamorous reality emerged. By 1986, Germaine was not just performing under the spotlight, he was disappearing into it. Caught up in the nightlife of Chicago, he spiraled into a haze of secret rooms, endless drinks, cocaine highs, and reckless encounters. Prevention was a thought too late. The invincible feeling was nurtured by the euphoria. Somewhere in that haze, HIV quietly crept in, a silent invader waiting to strike. By the end of 1990, Germaine Stewart's body began to send alarming signals. He lost 14 kilos in just 5 months. His skin turned yellow, his urine became dark. Yet he remained silent, fearful of the media, terrified of judgment. He refused help, canceled shows, and locked away an unfinished album that would never be released. The world kept moving on. His name faded from the headlines. In 1991, a close friend finally learned the truth: Germaine was dying. HIV had ravaged his body. By 1993, he had disappeared completely, hiding in a run-down apartment in a forgotten corner of Chicago. No music, no visitors, just silence and pain. Then came the final blow. In 1996, liver cancer in its final stage, aggressive and untreatable, took over. He had no insurance, no money. Hospitals refused him. Each day brought new pain, vomiting, blood fever, seizures from nerve damage. His once vibrant body withered down to 42 kilograms. His eyes bulged out, his belly swollen. His heartbeat trembled, irregular, clinging to fragile threads. At 3:42 a.m. on March 17, 1997, Germaine Stewart took his last breath. They said the pain was unbearable, like acid tearing through his insides. He died alone in a cold room. His body wasn't discovered for nearly 15 hours. When the medical examiners arrived, it was too late to preserve any dignity. Friends came too late. Family barely stayed. No funeral, no memorial, only silence. Germaine once sang about joy, innocence, and love without shame. But in the end, he died the way society treated his illness: lonely, abandoned, and cast aside. David Cole, the musical mastermind behind C+C Music Factory, was the driving force behind some of the most iconic house and R&B anthems of the 1990s. His sound lit up dance floors around the world, and his rhythms made crowds move. But behind the flashing lights and sold-out tours, a silent nightmare was unfolding. While fans saw a genius at the peak of his fame, Cole was battling a struggle no one could see. Caught up in the fever of stardom, he lived fast, indulging in fleeting pleasures and dangerous nights. And somewhere in that reckless freedom, HIV crept into his life like a silent predator. At that time, AIDS was still shrouded in fear and stigma, sweeping through communities with little warning and even less understanding. Cole never spoke about it. He kept creating, kept smiling, kept performing while the disease silently drained his strength. On January 24th, 1995, David Cole passed away alone in New York. There was no farewell tour, no final memorial, just silence. The official cause complications from AIDS. His death sent shockwaves not only through those who loved him, but across an industry that never saw it coming. It wasn't just the loss of a brilliant musician. It was a heartbreaking reminder of the lives lost in silence and the urgent need to break that silence. Max Robinson. The spotlight and the solitude behind the lens. In the 1970s, Max Robinson broke barriers in American media, becoming the first black man to anchor a national broadcast on ABC News. With his deep, calm voice, dignified presence, and sharp intellect, he was not just a journalist. He was a symbol of hope for millions of black Americans in an era still overshadowed by the darkness of racial inequality. But behind the polished words and studio lights was a man burdened by secrets, quietly carrying a battle that would follow him to his last breath. In the tragic final chapter of his life, Max Robinson lay motionless in the intensive care unit at Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C. The room was cold, lifeless, with no cameras, no applause. Only the steady hum of the ventilator filled the silence. His body, once strong and commanding, had withered skin clinging to bone as tubes and wires coiled around him, struggling to sustain the last remnants of life. At the height of his career, Robinson contracted HIV through unsafe sexual practices. But in a world that treated the disease with fear and stigma, he kept his diagnosis hidden. However, the virus showed no mercy. AIDS ravaged his immune system, leaving him defenseless, as pneumonia filled his lungs, drowning him with each breath. Each inhale became a battle, a desperate effort to survive. On December 20th, 1988, at the age of 49, Max Robinson took his final breath. It was only after his death that the truth came to light, sending shockwaves through the public and leaving many in sorrow. But even in tragedy, his legacy endures. Max Robinson was not just a journalist. He was a pioneer opening doors for future generations of black reporters. His impact on national media remains undiminished, ensuring that his story, his struggle, and his triumphs will never be forgotten. Bernard Edwards Jr., the genius bassist and founding member of Chic, was not just a pioneer of funk and disco. He was a force that shaped the rhythms of an era. His melodies defined a generation, creating timeless hits that still make crowds move today. But behind the stage lights and the beat of global tours, a silent storm was brewing. By the late 90s, as Chic prepared for a long-awaited comeback, Edwards faced his greatest battle not with fame or music, but with HIV. The wild parties, fleeting romances, and relentless touring schedules had left their mark. AIDS, the invisible enemy of a generation, had quietly crept in. Despite his weakening body, Edwards never let it show. He continued to perform with unmatched energy, hiding his pain, while giving everything he had left to the world. But on April 18, 1996, in a hotel room in Tokyo, that silent battle came to a sudden end. Pneumonia driven by immune system failure took him in his sleep. There were no grand farewells, no warning signs, just a brutal silence where music once thrived. Bernard Edwards' death was not only a loss, it was a quiet pain, a haunting reminder of a disease that had taken too many voices too soon, and a warning the world still hadn't fully heeded. A star dimmed by suffering. Larry Riley was a beloved face on American television, captivating audiences with his role in Knots Landing. He was the embodiment of talent and dedication, an actor who brought depth and charisma to every scene. But behind the bright lights and applause, he was fighting a silent, painful battle, one that ultimately took his life. On June 6, 1992, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, Larry Riley took his final breath. His last days were filled with silent suffering. He lay motionless in his hospital bed, his body a mere shadow of its former self, withered by illness, no longer able to recognize even those closest to him. His once radiant face, which had brightened the screen, was now pale and gaunt, marked by sores from relentless infections. His once bright eyes, filled with warmth and emotion, now stared vacantly into the abyss. Each breath was a battle, weak, ragged, interrupted by painful dry coughs that shook his fragile body. Swollen from kidney failure, he could no longer move. Larry had contracted HIV in the 80s, during a time when the disease was shrouded in fear, ignorance, and stigma. Like so many in the entertainment industry, he became one of its countless victims. But he kept his diagnosis hidden, fearing the backlash that could end his career. He worked tirelessly, pushing forward despite his increasingly deteriorating health until he could no longer conceal the truth. Eventually, his immune system collapsed completely, leaving his body defenseless. The pain was unbearable, his suffering immense. But through it all, Larry Riley remained a warrior. His final days were filled with loneliness and agony, but his artistic legacy endures. His story is not just a tragic cautionary tale about the devastation of AIDS. It is a testament to resilience, to the indomitable spirit of a man who gave everything to his craft. Though his life was cut short, his art passion and influence will never fade. Melvin Lindsay was not just a DJ. He was the heartbeat behind the legendary Quiet Storm format, a soulful wave of late-night R&B that reached millions. His voice as smooth as velvet, his presence magnetic, and for a time it seemed nothing could dull the star on the rise. But behind the smooth melodies and studio lights, a dark truth was lurking. Throughout the 80s, Melvin sank deeper into a fast-paced lifestyle. Endless parties, fleeting romances, and reckless moments came at a cost greater than anyone realized. Somewhere in the whirlwind, he contracted HIV, unaware, unprepared. The disease took its time, but when it struck, it was devastating. The man once full of charm and allure began to fade, his body weakening to the point where he hardly recognized himself in the mirror. His voice, once a symbol of calm and passion, fell silent. On March 26, 1992, at the age of 36, and still at the peak of his influence, Melvin Lindsay passed away. He left behind a legacy that forever changed radio and a haunting sorrow for what might have been had fate played a kinder tune. Gil Scott-Heron was not just a musician, he was a movement. The man behind powerful anthems like The Bottle and Home Is Where the Hatred Is, he gave a voice to the unheard, laying the groundwork for hip-hop and neo-soul as we know them today. But behind those powerful words was a man quietly deteriorating. Beneath the brilliance and defiance was a soul wrestling with demons that the public never truly saw. On May 27, 2011, the world lost this icon. Officially, it was pneumonia that took him, but those closest to him knew the deeper truth: Gil had been living with AIDS. The disease silently ravaged his body, stripping away the power from the voice that once shook systems and ignited revolutions. His battle with addiction had left him drained, and by the time the world recognized the full extent of his pain, it was too late. He fought with words, but the enemy that took him was silent, invisible, and unforgiving. Many years after his death, the truth came to light not just about his illness, but about the cost of carrying the world's pain in his music. Gil Scott-Heron left behind more than just songs. He left a legacy of resistance, resilience, and a haunting reminder that even revolutionaries bleed. Willie Ninja was more than just a dancer. He was a revolution, a fierce icon who brought voguing from the underground dance floors of Harlem to the runways of Paris and the global stage. But on September 2, 2006, in a quiet hospital room in New York, Willie took his last breath alone. No crowd, no camera lights, no music, only silence. AIDS ravaged his body like a slow, relentless executioner. A tragic consequence of an era where safe spaces and safe choices were scarce for queer artists. From the late 90s, Willie's strength began to wane, but he never let it show. He held his head high, walked with pride, even as the disease hollowed him out. Skin clung to bone eyes that once sparkled, now dimmed, and his signature flair faded into exhaustion. The world that once applauded him turned its back. The stage lights dimmed, fame forgotten. He spent his final months bedridden, unable to eat, speak, or breathe on his own, trapped within the body that once moved like poetry, the body that had changed culture, redefined dance, and given voice to the invisible. But in the end, there was no one beside him, no family, no final goodbyes, only the haunting question, how could someone who gave so much to the world be left to die in silence? Essex Hemphill lived fiercely, loved boldly, and wrote with an uncontainable fire. As one of the most uncompromising voices in the Black queer arts movement, his words carved out spaces where none had existed before. But on November 4th, 1995, that fire faded forever. His passing left a profound void that the world barely noticed. Born into a world that denied his truth, Essex transmuted pain into poetry. His work vibrated with a yearning for love, belonging, and freedom. Each verse was a cry against silence, a love letter to those relegated to the margins. But beyond the page, his search for acceptance led him down perilous paths, into fleeting embraces and risky escapes. As the AIDS pandemic struck, Essex was caught in its relentless grip. His body weakened, his voice faded, but his spirit never surrendered. Yet resilience couldn't shield him from the virus that decimated his generation. And so in a quiet room in Philadelphia, he took his last breath. No blaring headlines, no national outcry, no monuments to his brilliance, only the silent judgment of a world that never fully embraced him. Essex Hemphill died as he often lived, fiercely, honest, painfully unseen. Marlon Riggs was more than a filmmaker. He was a fearless artist, a Black queer visionary who wielded his camera as a weapon against silence, shame, and injustice. In an era when HIV was whispered about in fear and stigma, Riggs stood tall and declared to the world that he was living with the virus. That honesty was revolutionary. His work, vibrant and poetic, gave voice to those the world tried to erase. Even as AIDS ravaged his body, he continued to create, continued to fight, refusing to let the disease steal his message. In his final days, pain mounted, strength faded, but his fire never extinguished. On April 5, 1994, his body finally succumbed. But the spirit of Marlon Riggs did not vanish. It echoes louder in every truthful frame he left behind. Tony Fields, When the Spotlight Dimmed. Once illuminating Broadway, Tony Fields captivated audiences with effortless grace and boundless energy. His movements were poetry in motion, his presence magnetic. But as AIDS took hold, the lights that once bathed him in brilliance faded, and his once powerful body withered into fragility. On February 27, 1995, at St. Joseph's Hospital in Burbank, California, Tony lay still clinging to life. His immune system had collapsed, leaving him trapped within a body that no longer served him. Muscles had atrophied, skin had lost its color, and his eyes, once bright with passion, could only flutter weakly. Just a few years prior, this was a body that danced and twirled effortlessly across the stage, earning thunderous standing ovations. Now he couldn't lift a finger. Pain coursed through him, relentless and unforgiving, but there was no audience left to witness his suffering, no roaring applause to offer solace. At 36 years old, Tony Fields took his final bow, but this time there was no curtain call, no cheering crowds, only silence. A talent lost too soon. A name that should have shone brighter for longer. Alan Wiggins was a blazing talent, a speedster who electrified stadiums playing for the San Diego Padres and the Baltimore Orioles. But his ascent to baseball glory was shadowed by the demons of addiction. Drugs and illness stole everything: his career, his health, his future. When the baseball field abandoned him, his life unraveled. Poverty and sickness tightened their grip, pulling him deeper into the darkness. By June 1, 1991, Wiggins lay frail and broken in a dimly lit Los Angeles home, too weak to stand. The body once built for speed was now withered beyond recognition. Malnutrition sapped his strength, pneumonia crushed his lungs, and the legs that once blazed across stadiums barely stirred beneath a thin, tattered blanket. At 32 years old, Alan Wiggins took his last breath. The roaring crowds had long gone silent. A man who once held boundless potential became a forgotten tragedy, a star that burned too bright only to fade too soon. Frankie Knuckles didn't just create a sound, he ignited a revolution. With hypnotic beats and explosive energy, he transformed underground warehouse parties in Chicago into a global movement. From the sweaty dance floors of Chicago to international acclaim, Frankie built a legacy that reshaped music forever. But behind the rhythm and flashing lights, a silent battle unfolded. The very nightlife he helped define took its toll. Years of partying and fleeting encounters masked a deeper struggle. He lived with HIV. Overtime complications from diabetes and AIDS began to dim his light. On March 31, 2014, Frankie Knuckles passed away quietly at his home in Chicago. No spotlights, no stage, just the silent grief of loved ones and a shattered music world mourning the loss of a pioneer whose beats would echo forever. Stony Jackson, a vanishing act in isolation. Once a familiar face on American television, Stony Jackson had his moment in the spotlight only to disappear as quickly as he arrived. As HIV ravaged his body, the world moved on, barely noticing his decline. On October 20th, 1995, in a lonely hospital room in Los Angeles, Stony lay still in bed, his body so frail he could barely move. The eyes that once held such charisma now lacked their spark. Sterile white walls enclosed him. But no one came. No family, no friends, only the steady beep of the machines quietly counting down his final moments. At 35 years old, Stony Jackson passed away unnoticed and unremembered. From a familiar name in households to a forgotten soul, he faded into oblivion as if he had never been. The inventor of the high five and the tragic fate that followed. Glenn Burke wasn't just a talented baseball player, he was a pioneer, the first openly gay player in Major League Baseball MLB. But instead of glory, his courage cost him everything. Rejected by the sport he loved, ostracized by teammates and the league, Burke became an outcast. The world he helped change refused to stand by him. In the years that followed, he roamed the streets, hungry, forgotten, lost, walking the same paths where crowds once roared his name. When AIDS took hold of his body, his sister took him in, offering a final refuge in San Leandro, California. But by then, it was too late. The man who was once a force on the field was now frail, his body wasting away. Pneumonia constricted his lungs, each breath a painful struggle. But the most heartbreaking image was his hands. The hands that had created the iconic high five that once reached for the sky in elation. Now they were clenched, unable to open. On May 30th, 1995, Glenn Burke passed away in poverty and solitude. The man who once filled stadiums with joy left the world in silence, but his legacy endures. The high five, a simple gesture of victory, unity, and connection, lives on as a silent tribute to the man the world tried to forget. The quiet departure of a gentle giant. Kevin Peter Hall had a gift. He could breathe life into towering, fearsome creatures, most famously as the Predator, an unstoppable force on screen. But in a cruel twist of fate, the real battle he faced was one he couldn't conquer. In 1990, following a car accident, Kevin received a blood transfusion, unaware that the life-saving bag carried a silent killer. HIV stealthily entered his body undetected at first, but when it struck, it did so with ruthless precision. The once imposing actor found himself in an insurmountable battle. At the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, the giant who once dominated screens now lay still, his towering 7'2" frame frail and wasting away. Pneumonia constricted his lungs, forcing him to rely on a ventilator. The once powerful hands capable of embodying terrifying creatures now trembled, too weak to lift. His sunken eyes, once full of warmth and life, now stared blankly and dim. On April 10, 1991, at the age of 35, Kevin Peter Hall took his last breath. There was no grand Hollywood comeback, no heroic final scene, just the quiet, sorrowful end of a gentle giant. As the cheers faded away, Roy Simmons was once a force on the football field, a fierce and talented athlete playing for renowned teams like the New York Giants and the Washington Redskins. He even competed on the grand stage of Super Bowl LXVIII, his name echoing through stadiums filled with thousands of passionate fans. There was a time when he stood amidst the roaring crowds, basking in the applause, an icon of strength and victory. But when he publicly came out as gay, the cheers fell silent. The lights that once shone on his talent dimmed, and the doors of his career slammed shut. Shunned and forgotten by the league that had once embraced him, Roy found himself adrift, spiraling into a world of drugs, fleeting relationships, and an undiagnosed battle with HIV. As the illness took root, all he had left was a small, dilapidated apartment in the Bronx. The athlete who had once been powerful, who had charged through defenders with unstoppable force, was now frail and immobile, his legs contracted, useless. The body that once defied opponents could no longer fight. Food became a distant memory. Pain was his only companion. On February 20th, 2014, Roy Simmons passed away alone, a forgotten man in the world that had once cheered him. The stadiums that once echoed his name were now empty. The legacy he carried, the dreams he once embodied, were left to fade in a cold, cruel silence. From stardom to shadow, Gene Anthony Ray danced his way into the hearts of millions with fame igniting the screen with vibrant talent and boundless energy. But his life wasn't a dazzling encore. It was a tragic decline, a slow fading of a star extinguished too soon. Drugs, illness, and poverty stole his future, each setback gnawing away at the brilliance that once defined him. On November 14, 2003, in a quiet hospital room in New York, Gene lay helpless. His immune system had collapsed. A stroke had left him immobile, and the body that once soared across stages was now frail and still. There was no audience, no standing ovation, only the hum of medical machinery and the weight of silence. At 41, Gene Anthony Ray took his final bow, not before thunderous applause, but before the quiet indifference of a world that had long moved on. The star that once shone so brightly faded before it had a chance to rise again. Eazy-E, a legend gone too soon, too young. Eric Eazy-E Wright wasn't just a rapper, he was a movement. The audacious founder of NWA defined hip-hop rebellion, living fast, loud, and without regret. No one expected someone like him to fall, not so suddenly, not like this. It all began in February 1995. He coughed incessantly, struggled to breathe, his body surrendering in a way no one could explain. Doctors thought it was just the flu, but the truth hit like a punch to the gut. Eazy-E had HIV. A month later, on March 26th, he passed away. The news sent shockwaves through the hip-hop world. Death didn't knock. It kicked the door down swift and unforgiving. But before leaving, Eazy made a courageous choice. He publicly disclosed his diagnosis. In the 90s, AIDS was a taboo subject, especially in the music industry. No one wanted to talk about it until Eazy spoke up. His final message forced a generation to wake up. It shattered the illusion of invincibility and exposed the dangers of living without limits. Eazy-E's death was not just a tragedy. It was a turning point, a warning, a legacy that runs deeper than music. If this video moves you or uncovers stories you've never heard, please like and share it with those who might find it meaningful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our profound explorations of the untold stories of stars who've shaped our world. Your support means everything to us. Stay tuned for more heartfelt and thought-provoking stories.